Okay, so the question is, how can I bring a scattered, improvised approach to the fundamentals such as form and value? So I am going to assume that the question here is about the creating imagery without much of a plan at the beginning. So a scattered improvised approach, and is actually how I would describe my sketch style. So when I'm sketching, I sort of have a scattered and improvised approach to drawing something, because this sort of plays into how I develop ideas in my drawings, and that is that I sort of allow the lines and the forms to guide the idea, as opposed to me trying to sort of force and push the idea in a particular direction, or push the drawing in a particular direction. So let's start by just creating some bounding boxes, and let's try just sketching something in these boxes. But I'm not even gonna think about what I'm planning on drawing ahead of time. And this is something that I would do. This is an approach I would take using pencils, but in this case, I'm doing it digitally. So in my sketchbook, I might draw myself some boxes like this, and then I would just start moving my pencil around. The idea is not that I know I want to draw some sort of weird monster right away, or maybe I do. Maybe I've got in mind that I want something sort of figurative or something environmental, but I'm going to allow the drawing to evolve as I go along. I'm not going to really overthink what the idea is right away. So now, actually, as soon as I started making some lines, I started to see some shapes. I almost sort of see the backside of this very, overweight, large person or ogre maybe, or something. And I don't know, I just saw it right away. It's possible I wouldn't have seen anything at all for a while, and I have to keep pushing and pulling it. But because I saw something pretty quickly, I start moving it in that direction. But as you see, I'm still not like, being overly concerned about my lines being in a particular place. I'm still kind of approaching it with this sort of looseness, that allows me to continue to experiment with the drawing. So I'm just going to keep working on this a little bit. And the thing is as I'm drawing this, I might realize that maybe I need a little more room. So I could even could scale this down. And as you'll notice, I'm sort of working fairly small. Actually, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale the box up instead. Or maybe I could move him over here. Move him up. This box is a little bigger over here. So what's interesting though is as I'm working on it, I'm not as crazy about it. As I start to hone in a little bit on this form, something about it that's bothering me. Maybe I committed too early to the idea. Should have allowed it to. I should have played with it a little more, perhaps, before I decided what exactly I saw. But as you can see, I'm just sort of like, at this point, I'm pushing and pulling. I'm doing a pencil and then eraser, or brush and eraser, B and E, going back and forth between the two. But something that might help here now is to try a different brush. So we'll go with this sort of very flattened wedge sort of brush. Maybe there's something here. And I could start maybe indicating some value by just putting some blobs in there and seeing if that helps. That helps define the form in some way that might be a little more satisfying. But again, I can push and pull here too, And you see, I'm keeping it loose, right? And not being overly concerned. And really, sketching should be loose and sort of scattered because, especially when you're not entirely certain what it is you're drawing. If you're not drawing from life, okay, and you're drawing from imagination, then you need to sort of create randomness that your mind and your imagination will start to fill in for you based on your own internal visual library, a bank of imagery that you draw upon subconsciously. And it's like, it's the old looking at the clouds thing. You look at the clouds and you see shapes and it reminds you of something. That's what your imagination is good at doing. It's good at taking seemingly random shapes and turning it into something explainable or recognizable, right? Putting meaning where previously there maybe wasn't any. Again, not really sure. Still not sure how I'm feeling about this. If I'm finding it interesting or not. I mean, I'm finding it interesting enough to keep trying. But I think what I need is I need more space because he's feeling too cramped, this character. So I am going to change my bounding box here. Oops. So that this guy doesn't feel like he's crammed in this little box. I could have scaled him down, but I didn't want to scale down the drawing. I'd rather scale up the box that he's in, the frame. All right, that's feeling better. I feel like I've got more room here now to try some stuff. So, I feel like I want him to be holding something or have some sort of interesting object he's interacting with. So now that I've given myself some more room, I can play around with it. Again, I don't know what this object is that I want him to be interacting with, but that's why I'm going to sort of like just try out some random movements of the pencil, of the drawing tool. So something that's kind of forming. It could be a staff or a bow that he's holding. That might be interesting. Maybe he's holding a bow with like some sort of an animal head on top of it. So if he's got a bow, obviously he's an archer of some sort. A very non-typical archer. It's sort of strange body shape. Maybe he's a dwarf or something like that. Something similar to a dwarf, with that kind of body shape. So if that's the case, then maybe, I mean, if I want him to be sort of typical dwarf, maybe I'd give him a beard, but maybe I don't. Maybe that's too cliche. Maybe I just want to try something different. So as you can see, I'm not. And this is certainly not an academic approach to drawing. It's really just using randomness and combining that with just sort of an internal memory bank of shapes and images, and allowing my imagination to draw connections, to force connections. Unfortunately, this bow is sort of pointed downward, so it's not at the ready to fire. So it looks odd that he might be looking down towards, it's almost like we have to show that he's looking up, maybe in preparation of firing the bow. He's finding his target. So let's change the position of his head, or his gaze. So that tells a story. Maybe he's waiting for the right moment to pull that bow up. All right, so once we sort of got something that we kind of like where it's going, we want to make this drawing more solid. We want it to feel a little more convincing. So now maybe we will take the same approach to the value. We've worked on form. Let's try approaching the value now. I'm going to crop this. And so we're just working on this particular drawing. Okay. So let's see. We'll choose like a bigger brush, something sort of scumbly, big crunchy brush. And I'll use a different layer, maybe to just kind of start laying in some value. And look, I'm not concerned about staying within lines or anything, because I'm going to sort of do a push and pull kind of deal, right? And by using a big brush like this, I might also find new ideas for the forms, right? And that's why it's okay to let these things go sort of outside of their outside of the boundaries of the lines that I've drawn, because maybe as I sort of push and pull, I realize that I want some other form. Maybe I do want him to have a beard, right? And maybe some sort of like collared tunic or something that he's wearing. I'm not comfortable with him being, bare-chested or something. I'm gonna try something that's maybe, some clothing, something else. As you see, as I'm just sort of pushing and pulling the value using different brushes. Now, taking this approach is more difficult when you've been given sort of a specific assignment. You know, if I've been asked to draw an elf, then this would not be a good end result, right? However, I would say that the simple act of drawing and painting often gives you ideas, or is often where we think best, or when we think best, perhaps is a better way of putting it. So it's very possible that taking this approach, even though I've ended up here, you know, I was assigned to draw an elf, but I ended up with the dwarf. It might actually not be all for naught. It might turn out that I think of an idea for how to approach an elf that's never been seen before, and or that's unique in a way that, you know, I can then take this and modify it, or take some ideas from what I've drawn here and incorporate it into a new drawing where I do think a little more consciously or deliberatively about drawing an elf. So I wouldn't completely discount, you know, this sort of random approach. In fact, I think lots of artists do this, and they do it as sort of an exercise, as a way to warm up. And in doing the warm-ups, I mean, this is how I approach a lot of my assignments. You know, you end up finding a solution for something in the unlikeliest of places, right? So in drawing an elven, I'm sorry, a dwarven archer, it may turn out that I've found a great solution for an elven wizard or something. You never know, but you have to allow yourself you have to give yourself permission to be open-minded to taking this approach, and have the courage to trust that your imagination and your ability to think more clearly when you're drawing and painting will eventually give you the result that you want, and make you look like a complete genius, because people will say, wow, I would have never thought of that approach to your elf design. It's almost like it was influenced by a dwarven archer. Again, as you can see, now I'm starting to get a little more deliberate in what I'm doing, because, you know, I kind of know what this character is now, but, you know, again, if I don't know what I want his hair to look like, I can just start playing around with stuff, right? And start putting random shapes in different places. Maybe it turns out he's got some sort of headdress that is more interesting than just hair, right? I know I want something interesting, but I'm not sure what, so I just try different things. Right? Sort of a scattered approach, a random approach to all parts of the design of this character. Or maybe I want something, you know, some interesting things, you know, that he's carrying on his back, but I'm not really sure what. Or, you know, there's an interesting design on the back of his clothing, but again, I'm not really sure what it is, but all of a sudden it's kind of looking like this weird one-eyed octopus or something. That might be interesting. I might have to change that later. Who knows? But I'm open to the idea. and I'm open to letting these lines and these shapes just guide me on my journey. I mean, it's like a journey of discovery, right? I mean, instead of trying to plan everything out in your mind, you're going on this fun little trip, and you're learning about this guy for the first time, and it's almost like you're experiencing it in as fresh of a way as somebody who will see this design afterwards and go, wow, how did you come up with such a unique approach, or a unique idea, or a neat image? So going back to value here, again, I'm going to take start with a different layer. Oops, I'm going to go 3. And again, try the value. And the other thing that's good to do is to sort of zoom out, and if you want to just try some, again, completely sort of random and scattered, right? And do it as sort of a push and pull. Like I said, other ideas might present themselves as you're doing this. I'm starting to think maybe there's more to this image. Maybe I need to really expand the canvas more this time, and allow this approach to give me more in the scene. Let's try some various random brushes. It's not something that I typically do, is use a lot of these sort of custom brushes. I usually just use them for texture purpose, but because most of the drawing, most of the time I do my drawings on paper with pencil. But it's a really nice approach when painting digitally, because, like I said, you might end up with ideas that you never even thought of previously, or would have thought of if you'd tried, Oops, a little lag there, sorry. I'm trying to think of elements that could make the composition more interesting. Maybe he's on the edge of this burned forest or something. There's mountains in the background. Or he's looking into a forest. He's at the edge of the forest, and he's looking into it. We're at this kind of extreme angle. Could be kind of looking up at the canopy of the forest. Of course, that wouldn't make too much sense because he's not really at that sort of angle. But he could be. I mean, maybe we could then take him and distort him a bit. I mean, it's potentially problematic because it's done as a flat drawing. I mean, it's not in three dimensions, but we might actually be able to get that to work. And a little bit of suspension of disbelief with the angle of approach there is expected. So this is kind of neat. An interesting image is starting to form itself. Could be that he's still sort of like some growth and bushes and brambles around him here. So remember, when I started this drawing, I had no idea what I was going to draw, right? It just kind of evolved on its own. You know, now we kind of know. We want him to be, you know, in a fair amount of shadow because the light's probably coming from behind him or on the other side of him, rather. Silhouetting him against the sky, and then we see this forest of trees beyond. He's about to step into, but he's at the ready with his bow and arrow. Doesn't have it lifted and pointing at anybody or anything yet, but he knows there's dangers ahead, right? Let's make sure this isn't too big. And the other thing is, you know, this doesn't need to be a very large image just yet. So I'm actually going to reduce it down just so that it's easier to work with. Make sure to save your files. Otherwise, you will be sad later if you crash or anything. All right. So again, as you can see, what started as sort of randomization starts to become something more deliberate. But we may never have arrived at this point, these ideas, unless we had allowed that randomized, scattered approach to guide us. You know, I think what you have here is the start of a, you know, this is a really solid thumbnail sketch, you know, that will continue to inform the image going forward, even as you take it into final. And you can continue to use this sort of random and scattered approach at various stages and on a smaller scale with various parts of the image as you're going along. Then, since I work on a neutral gray here, we can now sort of also go in and start adding some lighter tone. I mean, right off the bat, you know, I want to sort of indicate this dramatic lighting coming from the other side of him, really silhouetting him against the foreground. I'm sorry, against the background. He's in the foreground. push that back some so that it doesn't compete with the contrast here, because I'm sort of trying to show that this forest that he's about to enter is sort of in the background, right? So the areas of greatest contrast are going to be in the stuff that's in the foreground. Maybe indicate almost sort of some rim lighting around him. Maybe some highlights at the back of his bow there. The quiver of arrows, doesn't he? So this almost feels like that might be what's going on here. And you'll notice I'm going to paint over that design I had on his back, but I think it's more important that he's got his quiver of arrows. So you can see you don't have to worry about being too exacting, especially when you're sketching. The looseness is what's going to help you form your idea and just make it feel more alive. Again, if you want to continue to evolve this idea, you could say, well, I like this, but still not quite enough going on, or I want something else to just make it that much more interesting. So might we just start a new layer and try something random, like maybe there's something in the extreme foreground, like some leaves of grass or something that's just sort of cutting in here. That's what's sort of great about working digitally, is you can kind of experiment with stuff, and if it's not working, you can kind of dial it back easily because you started this on a different layer. I wasn't really sure where I was going with that, but actually, if I keep playing around, maybe we get some sort of foreground foresty elements. Aha. So we can really see that this forest is all around him, and sort of ominously intruding upon his world, or reaching out and grabbing him, pulling him in. He's sort of hesitant. He's not sure if he wants to go in to this world, into this forest. So, I wasn't sitting here and kind of thinking about every branch and looking at, and drawing every leaf and everything. I'm just, if I don't like the way something looks, I can undo or repaint it or what, or something, or anything. I can, that's the whole idea of this kind of approach, is that you don't have to commit to anything so early, and so by experimenting, you give yourself the room to be open to making the image even more interesting and more exciting. But as you're going along, you have to think about the fundamentals, of form and value, and but don't be overly stodgy about it. I mean, as things recede in the distance, the contrast is is not as great as the stuff in the foreground. So that's why making these leaves and branches almost, completely black, we know that they stand out as being foreground elements, and they don't compete with the trees in the background. So as I'm looking at this, I realize that this area isn't formed very well. It seems a little half-formed, so I'm going to go in there and try to figure out what's going on. It would be probably pretty dark, contrast-wise, because that light source is behind the arm. Oops, I should be doing it on a separate layer. That, again, it gives me the ability to sort of experiment how his hand looks, and I can sort of push and pull, right? I can paint and erase and still on a separate layer without worrying about screwing up the parts that I do like the shape of the bow or whatever. Instead, I can just experiment with the hand, make sure I get it how I want it. Sorry, I've still got a bit of a cold. Not very professional. All right. So yeah, so I think this is the start of a potentially pretty neat image, and we can just continue to refine it from here. And again, if ever I run into a problem and I'm not really sure what I want to do, I know I want something more interesting, well then just experiment with random shapes. Just do something completely random using whatever brush you want, and you might find suddenly there's an idea. Ooh, what if there's this, what if right at the edge of the forest he encounters some sort of deadly snake? And I only really had that idea after I just kind of randomly moved my brush around there, making these squiggly shapes. And suddenly it looked kind of like this snake coming up out of the grass. The thing is, that might necessarily sort of change his the direction he's looking. So I might need to at this point I need to flatten several of these layers. Take that head and kind of experiment with it. He should, if there's a snake coming at him, he probably should be looking down at it. If he doesn't want it to bite him. No, it's starting to look too much like he's leaning forward. He might want to be kind of pulling back some. Not sure if I'm buying this. starting to feel he's not that worried about the snake. Well, sometimes things don't exactly work right. So that's why, first of all, it's why it's good to have a good long history that you can kind of search back through. I don't know, maybe he's distracted and the snake's going to bite him and he doesn't even realize it, right? Might be an idea. I'll give the little sneaky some eyes. Oops. No. He's distracted by the forest. Spooky forest, maybe. Anyways, keep playing with it. That's why you should have a pretty good history, maybe 100 or 200 steps back, or just save things off at various points. The snake idea may not work, may not be that interesting, or maybe the snake is behind him. Who knows? But you get my point. And the thing is that when you take this approach, you're more likely to, well, first of all, as I said, you'd be looser and the drawing would feel more fresh and kind of will have more energy to it. And because of that energy, you sort of will tap into these sort of the using shapes and lines to your advantage to tell a particular story or to create tension. Like so if I'm drawing like this, very quick and loose, I have this tendency to want to create these sort of spiky things, and I can point them at him because really we want the viewer to see him first. But the conceit is that these spiky shapes are just part of the tree, right? But we're using the direction of the lines of these smaller and smaller branches to our advantage to kind of give this overall impression of something that's sort of coming in at him from several different angles, right? From all these different angles. So, psychologically we feel like he's got a lot ahead of him, and he's got a challenge ahead of him. It's not going to be easy. So, anyways, thanks for watching. I hope this helped. I hope this answered your question. And good luck.